Radiometric correction is also required for some imagery. And by radiometric correction, what we're actually correcting for is to try to get all of the imagery to their proper brightness values. So sometimes the brightness value may vary by the instrument that's measuring its brightness. So if it's measured with two different instruments, it might have two different brightnesses. But more often, it may vary with bands. So different bands of the remote sensing imagery might have different brightness values associated with it. It can also vary with the conditions when the recording of the image took place. And this is especially important if two different images were recorded on two different dates. It might be important to match the brightness values before those two images can be worked with together. So the times that we might want to work with these images together is either for creating mosaics, where we're putting a bunch of imagery together into one continuous image, or we might want to do some sort of multi-temporal analysis where, for example, the same area was imaged 2 years in a row, and we want the brightness values to be as similar as possible in order to do as good of an analysis as we can. So this shows why radiometric correction is important for a mosaic. In this example here, we're trying to mosaic imagery from a lot of different areas, and we can clearly see where the edges of some of those areas are by the changes in the brightness values associated with different bands of this imagery. But after we do radiometric correction, we can get more to something like this, where we can't really make out those seams at all anymore, and we're dealing with imagery that has been corrected to its proper brightness value. If we're trying to do radiometric correction for imagery that was collected at different times, then what we're basically trying to do is minimize all of these sorts of things. We're trying to minimize the variation in the illumination of the scene, and one of the best ways to do that is to look at imagery that was collected on the same date of different years, and we sometimes call that the anniversary date. We'd also want to make sure the atmospheric conditions were as similar as possible as far as clouds and smog and fog and other things, that those two things are as similar from year to year as possible. We'd want to hope that the viewing geometry, as far as whether we're looking straight down on an area or off at an oblique angle, is the same. And then we'd also want to check to make sure the response characteristics of the instruments that were used to measure this 2 different years in a row were as similar as possible. So the anniversary date is important because the sun comes in at different angles during the year. And even though day to day, the remote sensing satellite imagery does do a good job at keeping the angle between the sun and the image the same, this can't be said when we go from season to season, right? It's just there's too much variation in the direction of which the sun rays are coming in as the season varies, and that's why the anniversary date is so important.